My name is Ostap Kushnir. I work as an assistant professor at Warsaw University in Poland. I'm also John Kolaski Research Fellow at University of Alberta, and I have an honor to present this book to you, which is The Intermarium as the Polish-Ukrainian Linchpin of the Baltic-Black Sea Cooperation. This book is actually a collective volume of 6 authors. So 6 specialists in regional politics, economics, security, cultural studies. They came together to assess the notion of intermarium, which, to be honest, is quite ambiguous today. So, but that's what we would discover at the very end. So the book appeared as a product of the conference. So this book follows the conference on Intermarium, which took place in Warsaw in June 2017, if I'm not wrong, and it was published by Cambridge Scholar Publishing, which I'm very proud of. And I'm the editor of this book, which also makes me proud and happy, because this is indeed a quality product. So it actually exceeded my expectation from what I expected from this book. So this book consists of 6 chapters. First chapter is written by a historian, Professor Daria Nałęcz, from Poland, and she introduces the reader into the concept of intermarium, so what the intermarium initially meant. And she starts her description, she starts her survey from early 20th century, when the intermarium concept was presented by Joseph Pilsudski on a meeting at the Japanese embassy. Józef Pilsudski, sorry. So at that time, the term was created, the term was introduced into the public discourse, but that was the time when neither Poland nor Ukraine existed as independent states. And what Józef Pilsudski did, he introduced some aspirations for the future, because he truly believed that Poland would come into being, and that Poland would be capable to organize regional states and withstand the pressure from Germany, coming from Germany and Russian Empire. So at that time, the early 20th century, Russian Empire was in conflict relations with Japan. Therefore, the concept of intermarium was presented under the Japanese auspices. And the point with Pilsudski's concept, which started actually to take shape in 1918 and 1920s after the Vasyl conference, when Poland gained independence. So the problem with that concept was that it was very fuzzy. Pilsudski never defined what regional states, what amount of them, and what would be these regional states to create the intermarium, to create some kind of federal unity stretching between the Baltic and the Black Sea, because intermarium means between 2 seas. Yes, so the fuzziness of that concept, initial fuzziness, was that Pilsudski anticipated all states who would survive First World War and who would later on withstand pressure from Russian Empire and Germany to come together and to create some kind of federal unity. Yes, but he never pointed at what exactly the states, what would be the exact states to create that thing. In 1930s, I mean, the developments of 1920s and the prompt recovery of the communist Russia proved the intermarium concept to be counterproductive. So Pilsudski actually could not achieve his objectives, and then he switched to different projects. The concept of intermarium, again, that is what Professor Nałęcz writes further, gained some kind of new breath in 1930s under Józef Beck, who was the foreign minister of Poland at that time. And that intermarium concept was a group of states stretching between Adriatic, Baltic, and Black Sea. So this intermarium was broader and more shift to the south, if to compare with Pilsudski's conceptualizations. So, but that Intermarium also failed to come to existence because the Second World War started, and the Poland switched to the socialist political regime, or was introduced to socialism. So later on, the Intermarium concept, I mean, in 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, in the Polish political thought, it was not that well articulated, I put it this way. And it gained its actually romantic aureole after Poland regained independence in 1991. But it, at the beginning, in the early 90s, that was something interesting. That concept of regional cooperation looked quite interesting. But as history revealed and proved, Poland decided to switch to Euro-Atlantic integration instead of building up the Intermarium, the regional cooperation. So that concept was counterproductive, and throughout the 20th century, it did not get a proper ground. The second chapter was written by Professor Volodymyr Poltorak from Odessa National Mechnikov University. And he assesses the Intermarium concept from Ukrainian perspective. And this perspective is different from Polish. Because for Ukrainian historiography, as Professor Poltorak writes, the Intermarium space, or the space between the Baltic and Black Sea, it has much longer and deeper tradition than the Intermarium concept as it came from Poland. Because even during the Roman times, the Byzantium times, yes, specifically the leaders of Byzantium Empire, they perceived the space between Baltic and Black Sea as the Sea of Barbarians. So that was a holistic space inhabited with hostile tribes and peoples who posed a threat to the empire. So at that time, in the early medieval, late medieval times, the Intermarium concept, or the Intermarium space, yes, was articulated as something holistic and something dangerous. And starting from that point, Professor Poltorak gets to new times, to 17th, 18th century, and he points on the fact that there have always existed, let's put it this way, Ukrainian vision of how the Black to Baltic Sea space should be governed. And that Ukrainian vision embraced decentralization and grassroots self-organization. Yes, while you had, on the one hand, for instance, in the 17th century, yes, you had Rzeczpospolita, and you had growing Tsardom of Muscovy growing in power. And in between those two powers, you have a group of people who were, I can't say they were denied in right to be noble or denied in right to become nobility, but if to compare the local residents living in between that space of Baltic and Black Seas, and, for instance, the nobility residing in the core of Tsardom of Muscovy and the Rzeczpospolita. So this Ukrainian nobility, let's put it this way, was somehow frustrated that they were not getting enough power and attention, and they instead decided to create their own poles of power and self-organize that space, which later on was defined by Pilsudski as Intermarium. And that is the point, where Professor Poltorak ends. So that a lot of Ukrainian activists, a lot of Ukrainian thinkers and political figures, statesmen, they tried to pursue their ideas of self-organizing that space. And sometimes these ideas were conflictual, were in conflict to what Pilsudski advocated. And Professor Poltorak claims that Intermarium tradition in Ukraine is different from Polish tradition. Firstly, because it is not always connected to the Polish version of Intermarium. Secondly, this is because Ukrainians rarely use the term Intermarium itself. They use the Black to Baltic Sea axis, yes, not Intermarium. And thirdly, that Ukrainian vision of self-organization of that space is about decentralization, not about imposing quite rigid or consistent hierarchy of power. The third chapter, I'm the author of the third chapter, and I'm developing that narration, the narrative of Professor Poltorek and Professor Nałęcz, and I'm assessing Ukrainian attempts actually to self-organize or to lead the or to start the organization of that space. In particular, this is Guam as organization, because if you look at the Ukrainian theorists who tried to share or who shared with their visions of how the space should be governed, you see that they were quite south-oriented. For instance, Yuri Lepa, he claimed that Ukraine should cooperate closely with Turkey for the whole Intermarium space to be consistent and stable and protected enough from external powers. And if you look at Guam, actually, this is an attempt to build up what Yuri Lipa advocated. Donsol was quite sympathetic to. Simon Petlura had also his idea of Black Sea Union. So Guam as the unity of Ukraine, the international organization consisting of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and Azerbaijan. This is an attempt to create Ukrainian Intermarium. And you see that there is no space for Poland there. And Turkey also is not there, but because of different reasons. So, and I want to signal here that if you would like to build a regional bloc today, which is non-aligned to great world powers, it has no real political gravity. It cannot speak to the neighbors and to other players. Yes, so it's even if you try, you do not achieve great results, and not that many states would like to join that regional project. And in particular, the Guam idea was born and it was brought to surface because Poland in 1990s switched to Euro-Atlantic integration. So Ukrainians, President Kuchma, that was in 1998, he had a conference in Crimea, where he encouraged regional states to create some extra framework of cooperation. But I mean, what we ended up with was Guam, which remains up to now an advanced forum for international discussions, but not the functional international intergovernmental cooperation and framework. So that is what I'm writing about, and I'm concluding that actually the term Intermarium became a fuzzy concept which can explain everything and which can define everything. And you have far rights, you have some conservative political parties, you have national romantic people who use that term to define completely different things. So, and that fuzziness, it does not bring a common ground for discussion. Instead, it brings to surface some imperial aspiration or pseudo-imperial aspiration of the state, the regional state, leading other states and organizing other regional states around itself, around its core, becoming the core of that regional integration. Then you have the security cooperation by Mr. Bugri, who is a security analyst for Wooden Horse. And he claims that actually the Intermarium concept and the Polish-Ukrainian cooperation, which was expected to become the linchpin of that cooperation, it is also futile from the perspective of security. And he, presents one interesting, actually, argument and illustration for this point. So in early 1990s, when President Lech Walesa was the leader of Poland and President Kravchuk was leader of Ukraine, Kravchuk came to the meeting of the Visegrad Triangle. At that time, that was Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. And he arrived with a proposal that if these if all those regional states, yes, helped Ukraine to maintain its nuclear potential and arsenal, Ukraine in its state would provide the nuclear umbrella to all the regional states. So that was a very bold statement, and that was a very bold proposal at that time. But the proposal by Mr. Kravchuk was rejected by the leaders of Hungary, Poland, and Czechoslovakia, because they were on the way to their transatlantic integration. They were returning to European family, yes? And Ukraine itself was not in position to maintain all that nuclear potential by itself. I mean, that also came as a big surprise to me, and I asked Mr. Bugri 2 times whether he is sure in what he states, and he said yes, because he interviewed people who were engaged in these negotiations, and they confirmed that was so-called Kravchuk's plan to provide nuclear umbrella. So I mean, personally, I'm also very impressed to hear that, but Mr. Bugri insists that this is true. So what Mr. Bugri wants to say at the very beginning is that the alliance, the security alliance and security dependence between Poland and Ukraine at this particular moment is not very attractive. And if it emerged, it would not provide the security and the defensive umbrella to all the regional states. So what we have now between Poland and Ukraine is the security alignment. So Poland is very keen on helping Ukraine to develop its military potential, but within the frameworks of NATO, of OSCE, of European Union foreign and defense policy. So Poland does not act with Ukraine on the interstate level. Poland uses wider frameworks to help increasing Ukraine's defense capabilities and security sector. And other illustrations today, you have Pol-Uk brigade, Polish-Ukrainian brigade, as a brigade within the NATO structures. Then you have Lithuanian, Ukrainian, Polish battalion headquartered in Lublin in Poland, but these are more symbolic units than actual power. And in case of direct threat, military aggression against Ukraine, Poland is not very likely to come and help. That is, I mean, according to the Intermarium thinking, Intermarium philosophy, Poland is one of the major states in the region who is the pillar of the regional security. Yes, but in what we have right now in our world, Poland became one of the pillars of transatlantic security, and it tries to sort all the regional security issues within the wider frameworks, not by itself, and not on the through the intergovernmental arrangements with the regional states. Then we have Professor Przeszczepa, Katerina Przeszczepa, writing her chapter, and she looks at the contemporary Polish-Ukrainian political relations, and generally she arrives to conclusion that Polish-Ukrainian relations depend to a significant extent on the international situation and internal policies of Ukraine. So in 1990s, Poland was very actually keen to cooperate as an independent state, as the state who regained independence. Poland was very keen to cooperate with Ukraine, though the priority, the Polish priority of that time, was Euro-Atlantic integration. But when you have reforms by Balcerowicz in Poland and generally quite very great fast pace of reforms in Poland, in Ukraine, you had in 1990s the emergence of the hybrid regime. Yes. So and because of these discrepancies, because Poland was trying to reform promptly, though it was a costly reformation, Ukraine tried to preserve some sort of Soviet legacy and adapt it to new environment. and that made Poland alienate from Ukraine. So Poland started perceiving Ukraine as the state which does not work hard enough to get on tracks of the Euro-Atlantic integration. So that was the reason that in mid-1990s Poland was alienating from Ukraine. Then there was a Kuchma-gate scandal and Kulchuga scandal, and that was again these two events in late 90s and early 2000s. These were the red lights for Polish cooperation with Ukraine, because I mean that was completely these were completely the things Poland would never expect from a good neighbor, friendly neighbor. In 2004, situation changed, and you have President Kwasniewski arriving during the Orange Revolution to set up some kind of round table talks between all sides engaged. So in 2004, there was a huge boost of interest and a huge intensification of interstate intergovernmental relations. Up to 2008, when Poland discovered and Polish leaders discovered that the Orange camp quarreled within itself, and there were a lot of conflicts and no reforms were provisioned. And again, you have that fatigue, which lasted upon 2014 with the Euromaidan revolution. So what Mr. Szczepa tries to say is that actually Polish-Ukrainian relations today, the relations of the linchpin of that Intermarium, which here is a space between two seas, to a significant extent it depends on what is going on inside of Ukraine, and to what extent do the international frameworks which Poland is in, to what extent these frameworks allow Poland for individual actions, and to what extent these frameworks allow Poland to achieve more of the Polish national interests through acting with the support of a broader number of states. Then the final chapter is brought by Professor Tomasz Napierkowski from Warsaw School of Economics, and he uses data to the trade, foreign trade between Poland and Ukraine and other Intermarium states, simply to calculate whether the economic relations within that Intermarium space pays off, and he concludes that it doesn't. So actually, if you look at 2017, because he operates with 2017 data, the amount of goods and services Ukraine exported or imported to Russia exceeded, by a by a big margin, exceeded the volumes of trade within the Intermarium states, within the trade of Ukraine with Poland, with Baltic states, with Belarus. So by no means the trade within that within that Black to Baltic sea space is sufficient for Ukraine and Poland to develop their welfare. So and using different econometric calculations, formulas, Professor Napierkowski concludes that the trade is not cannot become the middle ground for strengthening Polish-Ukrainian relations, and thus strengthening the regional architecture between all interested states. And you know, in conclusion to all these 6 chapters, we arrived to the point that the Intermarium term, and as the term defining the regional cooperation today, it is futile, it is counterproductive, because it does not work. I mean, no matter how you look at it, it does not work. So politically, it's very ambiguous, and it's very attractive by far rights to propel their agenda. Economically, it does not work. It cannot boost the security cooperation. It neither is very efficient in building up a strong partnership between elites, political elites and establishment. And all the attempts undertaken by Ukraine, for instance, for instance, Guam attempt, it's also, it does not pay off. It does not work well. So this book concludes with a statement that the regional cooperation should be developed, should be considered, and should be built up, but the leaders dealing with regional integration and regional development should abandon the Intermarium framework, because it brings more bad than good. I was surprised actually by numerous historical findings. Findings by Professor Nałęcz and Professor Poltorak. And Professor Nałęcz pointed on one regularity. So in order for any kind of rigid regional architecture to come to being, at least three factors should be considered. First, Russia should be too weak to protest. Second, the Western state should be too neutral to protest. And thirdly, the regional states should be motivated to engage into that relations. So, and if you look at the history of the 20th century, I mean, these three factors were never in place at the same time. What Pilsudski wanted to do in 1920s, he wanted to use the defeat of White Russia and the weakness of Red Russia to construct that Intermarium, because Russia at that point of time was comparatively weak, yes, but even Pilsudski did not manage to use the moment. So, and afterwards, I mean, no proper moment was in sight. And at the beginning of the 21st century, the Intermarium concept became a bit outdated. Yeah, so that was the finding which personally, it was my personal discovery. Then if you speak of Professor Poltorak, my personal discovery was his depth, the depth of his thinking, because he looked at the Intermarium space from the early medieval times. So, and he presented that as the space which has always existed and the space which has always had its logics of development, logics of functioning and governance. And no matter what states and what powers were present there, this logics of self-organization, of the grassroots organization, was always in place. And the big powers like Byzantium Empire or Russian Empire or Rzeczpospolita, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, sometimes they perceived the grassroots organization of peoples from the Intermarium region as something negative, as some kind of threat to political stability of their states. That was also an interesting moment Professor Poltorak brought to life. So I think these were, I mean, the historical discoveries were the major discoveries, and then you have the Kravchuk's plan by Mr. Bugri. There are very few books on the Intermarium today in the world, and the concept itself is very original. It's very philosophical, I would say, and the concept emerged in very hard times to provide hope and security solutions for young states. So with this historical dimension, with this dimension of romantic thinking and expectations, this concept clearly deserves its highlight in the world academia and political science. However, if you look at the practical policies, at the policy making, the references to Intermarium concept should be as few as possible, because what they do, they boost today the right-wing, expectations, the right-wing moods, but they do not. But the concept does not bring a common ground for the regional interstate cooperation. Thank you. Take care. Bye.